This is Salty Believer Unscripted, a production of SaltyBeliever.com.
This is Salty Believer Unscripted. I'm Brian Catherman. With me is Jared Jenkins, and we have Dr. Jeff Iorg from Gateway Seminary. He's the president there, and a dear mentor might not be the right word, but a very helpful professor, resource, model for Jared and I both, being students there and just watching his ministry. He has been a church planter in Oregon. He has been a denominational leader, an associational leader, and now he's the president of a seminary that has moved a seminary campus and everything, the operation from San Francisco to Southern California, and involved a name change while it was still in operation. And I know how that went because I was a student there when that was happening. So we want to talk with you, Dr. Iorg, if we can, about leading in change. And we're in a time of change. Do you mind if we call you Jeff?
That'll be fine.
So I think a lot of people are going to be facing having to lead in change, whether they choose to or not, in this season. And I'm wondering if you might just walk us through some of the big takeaways you've learned. You've led in a lot of change throughout your entire ministry. It seems to be sort of your call.
Well, it does seem to be that way some days. But I think you've made a great point, Brian, in the beginning here. And that is, major change is sometimes thrust upon us, like it has been in the current situation we're facing. And other times it's by our intentional choice, where we strategically lead an organization to do something quite dramatic in terms of change. The dynamics of those are really quite different in terms of how they get started and particularly how we move into them. Now, after you get into the process of change, a lot of the situations may have some similarities. But I think there's a big difference in the beginning. The one we're facing right now has been thrust upon us, and so it comes with a sense of being unsettled, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of disruption, a lot of confusion, and those kinds of things have to be managed by the leader before you can move on to really implementing the kinds of things that need to be done to navigate the change.
So, I think one of the things that happened right off the bat was everybody was figuring out how to continue to communicate with their church. And I think we've had other discussions and other podcasts with people about all the varying ideas and how people have approached this. Do you feel like we've learned some things in that? Do you feel like we've made some mistakes in that? Maybe not as a whole, but maybe even individuals. What are some ways we could improve through when change is thrust upon us? Let me put it this way. When change is thrust upon us and we maybe make a quick response and then we have to make adjustments, and then is that part of the process? And is that how you've seen some of these things? What can we learn from some of these things is really what I'm getting at.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I would say about that is when change is thrust upon us like this pandemic has done, and you feel this sense of unsettledness and anxiety sort of rippling through your organization, one of the most important things to communicate from the beginning is a sense of calm, and to not let anxiety and a panicked sense of decision-making drive your timetables or your agendas on what you're doing. So the first thing I would say is, in a time of crisis like this, leaders have to take a step back, exhale a bit, and project and lead from a place of calm and systematic decision-making. I know, for example, here at the seminary, as soon as these things started happening related to social distancing, canceling of public gatherings, and other kinds of things that impacted us, I started getting a rapid-fire series of questions from people asking, what about this, what about this, what about that? And one of the disciplines of leadership in the midst of a crisis is to organize decision-making by the timetable when the decisions really need to be made, and not just rushing through decisions to give people a sense of artificial calm. Because when you do that, you wind up making bad decisions because you make them too quickly that then you have to undo, which then undermines people's confidence in your decision-making process. I'll give you just one example. I've been asked even as recently as yesterday, what about graduation? What about graduation? And my response has been, we don't have to decide that yet. Our graduations at our multiple campuses start about the 15th of May. So even if we waited until 2 weeks before, we still have about 3 weeks before we have to make that decision. And so while people are anxious and there's a sense of unsettledness and they want an answer, there's really no need for an answer yet. And when I've said what I just said to you, we have a timetable for making that decision. It calms people and helps them understand how to move forward. So one of the things I'd say up front is we may have made some mistakes as leaders by making too many decisions too quickly. It's better to even in the midst of crisis, calmly move along and decide that the right timetable and the right pace and make those calls when you have to. Now, some decisions have to be made quickly, and I understand that, but not all of them have to be made quickly.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think, as a pastor here in Salt Lake City, and I know Brian has felt this as well, many of us made a lot of quick decisions, and some of them were time constrained. I mean, Sunday came pretty quick right after that initial wave of things. And I feel like many of us now are actually circling back and beginning to bring the theology back to bear on some of our decisions. And so what would you say to us as many of us now are having those deeper theological discussions going, is what we're doing actually faithful? Is it the best thing, right? Because I think we acted and now it's kind of like, wait a second, let's think about what we're really doing here because it's turning into a longer thing.
Can I just put that in a really simple, raw question?
Yeah.
Jeff, what do we do when we start second-guessing all of our decisions?
Yeah.
I think you make a difference between triage and treatment. When a medical situation is first created and a hospital is inundated with either the injured or the ailing or in a war zone, the wounded, triage takes place. Immediate things have to be done to immediately stop the bleeding. But then treatment is offered in a different way, moving on from the days and weeks after that. I don't think we need to second guess ourselves at all. We made triage type decisions sometimes in 24, 48, or 72 hours to know what to do and how to do it. Then we have a chance to catch our breath and say, now we've got another few days or another few weeks. Let's really think about the treatment, if you will, of what needs to happen to fix these problems long term. And then, Jared, I want to go back to your question about reflecting on the theology of some of these issues. I think one of the benefits of the pandemic as it relates to ministry leadership is going to be forcing us to look at what we were doing beforehand, what we've done during this situation, and how that's going to change us going forward. And I'll just give you one example. I've been saying for years that the American church is far too committed to an attraction model of evangelism, where we have to have people come together in order to evangelize the lost. We've even reduced evangelistic responsibility by church members to saying, invite your friends to our event. Now, attraction evangelism has a place. It definitely has some strengths and has a role in strategic planning for churches. But in a time like we're in right now, attraction evangelism isn't going to work, but sharing the gospel still is our responsibility. And I think this pandemic will remind us of the responsibility we have to train people to share the gospel in their families, among their friends, and in their relationships and networks of influence, even doing it the way we're doing this podcast electronically. But nevertheless, everyone taking responsibility for doing that. So that's just one example of how I think we have to rethink some of what we're doing now and how when we come to some new answers, it's going to change the way we do things going forward. I'll give you just one other quick example. I think we've rediscovered the telephone.
Truth.
We've been saying that too, actually.
I a few days into the seminary's reallocation of all our academic resources to online and distance learning formats, I took a morning, 3 hours, and I called every faculty member and talked with them personally. How are you doing? How are you making the transition? How's your family? What do we need to do to support and help you? Not texting, not emailing, but individually phone calling. It took a whole morning to contact every one of them. I left a few messages, but almost all of them I got to talk with. And the results of that are still, the positive results of that are still being felt in our organization as people talk about what those phone calls meant to network and connect us at the front end of this as the leadership team of our school. And so I'm counseling and encouraging pastors not just to do video messaging with their small group leaders and all that kind of thing, but to have Zoom calls where you see each other face to face, or to pick up the telephone and call someone and actually let your voice be heard by them in the moment.
Yeah, that's something our staff has done. We sat down as a staff over Zoom actually and split up our entire congregation and those that attend and said, okay, we got to call all these people every week best that we can, right? And we did that the first week. The fruit of that has been now many of those people are calling us, right? We don't even have to call them. They want to talk to us, right? And it's been sweet.
Let me say another issue related to that, Jared, is that I think one of the things that will come out of the pandemic is pastors rediscovering the power of pastoral care. Mm-hmm. You know, I know pastors get worn down by the demands of people. I fully understand that. And I'm concerned when I even hear pastors say, well, I don't visit the sick any longer. I don't go to hospitals anymore. I don't go to nursing homes and visit my aging members. I just don't do those things anymore. Well, I understand that, especially as churches grow, a pastor can't visit everyone. I fully understand that. But there's something powerful about pastoral care, about a pastor reaching out to people. And then, as you said, training and motivating those people to reach out to others. And I believe this pandemic, one of the positives will be pastors rediscover the power and the enjoyment of pastoral care with people on a direct basis.
I actually am. I'm glad that you agreed to do another podcast with us. So if you're listening, we're going to take that as an entire topic of the next podcast. So that's a great little snippet to say, hey, check that out. I want to go back to some of these issues with change being thrust upon us versus intentionally making change. And you went through a major change moving to seminary. You wrote a book about it, Leading Major Change in Your Ministry. That was through B&H in 2018. And then I had the really great benefit of sitting in on a lunch when I was working on my doctoral work. And you came in and said, okay, I was in a leadership seminar. So what better conversation to here's how he did some things, and it hadn't happened yet. And so you had shared a little bit, and then you shared what you planned to do. And then I got the benefit of watching how it played out. What happened was a multi-year project of a major change, plus coming on the other side of it and really, in essence, shepherding your faculty and caring for families. And so your whole organization watched you go through a change and watched you lead through that. I'm assuming built a great deal of trust. The students, I was a student, Jared was a student, we built a great deal of trust in that. How has that benefited you today where now something is thrust upon you and everyone's looking to you, but you have now got this whole new bunch of equity that some other pastors and other leaders may not have? What has been the benefits of already going through change?
When we started making the response to the pandemic, in one of my early communications with the whole seminary, I said, we're going to go through this well for a number of reasons. And one of them is we've been through something like this before. We know what it's like to have our world turned upside down and to find a way to work together, to trust God, and to find a new future. We know what it feels like to turn loose of an old normal, go through a prolonged period of uncertainty, and then come to a new normal. And we reflected and talked about, here at the seminary what it's like to draw on those past experiences. And so I think it's important for pastors and other leaders when you're going through something like this, although there may not be an exact parallel, it is good to reach back into the past and say, remember when God brought us through this project, through this crisis, through this difficulty, through this building program, through this relocation, through this major conflict in our church that was ultimately resolved. Remember how God brought us through that, and he will do the same thing for us again. And I was on a phone call yesterday with some other leaders, and one of them was a prominent Jewish leader. And in his prayer at the end, he basically recounted most of the Old Testament, it sounded like, saying, God, you've done this, and you've done this, and you've done this, and you've done this. And so therefore, we know you're going to get us through this pandemic. And that just, when I hung up the phone, I turned to one of my colleagues and said, that's one of the things I really appreciate about Judaism, is that they really have a sense of how God has always acted, and that gives us a sense of how he will act now. So I say the same thing. Look back over your organization's history and see how God has worked, and draw on that and remind people of that to help them have confidence in the present and the future of what God will do.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. Very helpful. What about the guy? I feel sorry. I've already heard two of these stories. Hey, I just took this new pastorate, and 2 weeks later, there's a pandemic, and what do I do? These people don't even know who I am. What advice would you give to that guy who has no idea about the history, hasn't earned that sort of trust? What can he do in this sort of crisis?
I would say do two things. Number one, thank God this is as bad as it will ever get, most likely. you can say, well, we got that out of the way the first month. I'm really glad that's behind me. The second thing I would do, and this is what I would say to every person, especially younger pastors who are starting out in their first or early pastoral experiences, is use those early weeks and months to build pastoral relationships. And so I would strongly encourage pastors who are new in their ministry settings to use this as an opportunity to really demonstrate to their new church family how much they care for them and how much they want to be pastorally connected to them. And so while you're not facing all the distractions of committee meetings and board meetings and leadership meetings and all the other things that go on in normal church life, maximize the time right now of making phone calls, sending messages, and staying connected to people in a pastoral way. Make this a tremendous relationship building time. Yes, this pandemic may set back some of your dreams of some of the big plans you wanted to roll out for your church in the first 3 months, 6 months, or a year. I understand that. But if you'll build relationships now and do all you can to demonstrate how you want to strengthen those relationships, then when this is behind us, you'll be able to start rolling out those kinds of plans, maybe in more effective ways than you ever dreamed in the first place.
That's really great.
That is good. What I want to just add to that, go a little deeper that, because I think the other side of that story is I also know several churches that are pastor-less, and this happened just previously or had been going on for months, and so they have this kind of weird, this interim leadership structure. How do these guys do well at keeping the flock together with the lack of a pastor?
That's really challenging, especially in smaller churches that may have either limited staff or no staff, and you're depending on a volunteer cadre of people to hold the ministry of a church together. I would, first of all, my heart goes out to a church in that kind of situation, because when there's a significant crisis or pressure point, that's when the absence of leadership is really magnified and felt most acutely. I'm really sad for churches that find themselves in that situation. So what I would say is the lay or the volunteer leadership team is going to have to take some initiative to strategically find ways to build and maintain the fellowship of their church. And that's going to be even more difficult because they have their own needs to attend to. This might be one of those times when it's great to be part of the Baptist family, so that a group like that can call on other pastors, directors of missions, state convention leaders, and say, we're in a crisis moment here. We need some outside help to coach us, guide us, or even come in and be interim with us. I'd strongly encourage churches not to feel like they're isolated, but to reach out and try to find some connectivity with others to help them through this time as well.
I think that's really good.
Hey, before we run out of time, because we're getting close, we've heard from Dr. Groza, which was great. Dr. Wilson, great brothers at Gateway. Just give us a quick little snapshot of what's happening at Gateway and kind of how things are going from the voice at the top.
Well, we made a commitment many years ago about being on the forefront of the development of educational technology. But when we built the new campuses in the Bay Area and here in Southern California, we really made an all-out commitment to that. So our facilities, our hardware, our software, and most importantly, our training for all kinds of educational delivery, online, video access, and face-to-face instruction, and how that's all integrated together. We've really worked hard at that. So when the pandemic happened and we were forced to go to delivery modes away from face-to-face instruction, I'm not exaggerating. We made the switch over in about 24 hours.
Yeah,
it was almost seamless. Now, we had some adjuncts and others who struggled a bit, who didn't have some of the base that the core faculty have, but we were able to ramp those guys up within a very short period of time. And so our educational program has continued on in really remarkable ways. We've done some student surveys, and student satisfaction is pretty high right now with how the transition has gone for us. And really, it's because we were already prepared to do this, even though we'd never had to do it. We were prepared to do it, and we were able to do it. So on that side of things, seminary is doing well. I think the biggest uncertainty for us is the same uncertainty there is in the churches, and that is we're wondering what the long-term financial impact is going to be on the cooperative program, on our own donors who support us individually, and on students' capacity to pay tuition going forward. And I don't want to reduce this just to the numbers, but or just to the dollars, but really that is the big uncertainty about the future. And we're in a position where we have a lot of financial strength because of the relocation and not having any debt and those kinds of things. But nevertheless, we are concerned about the long-term implications of how long the recovery will take and what that will look like for us. Well, we're tied closely to the churches. If the churches are struggling, we know we'll have to make some reductions, and we'll be glad to do that. But we're praying the churches will prosper and that they'll come back strong, and then the rest of us will be able to enjoy that as well.
Yeah, it's really great. It's just please hear from my heart. It's a wonderful, wonderful honor to have you. Just having been a student and watched you lead through change, I cannot thank you enough for the example that you've provided for me and many, many others. Jared's still a student. I have your picture hanging here with me getting hooded on the wall. So we are proud to be Gateway men. I just want to.
Not for much longer.
Not for much longer. He's almost done. Almost done.
I'm really happy that you guys connected with us, and I'm proud of what you guys are doing.
Hey, so I just want to encourage our listeners. The book I was talking about was called Leading Major Change in Your Ministry. It is a wonderful book, lots of principles on how to lead through change with a huge and fantastically interesting example of moving a seminary. Kind of a running illustration throughout the whole book. And so you can go find that on Amazon or wherever else you buy books. And then I would encourage you to check out Gateway Seminary. You can find more information about Dr. Iorg there and about the school. Also, one more little bit, if you haven't ever found this little podcast, Dr. Iorg does a podcast, which I really enjoy. It's been incredibly helpful for me, called Lead On. And he does that. It comes out, it seems like, maybe I don't pay as close of attention. It seems like it's weekly, but sometimes.
Every week. Yeah.
Weekly. Okay. Sometimes I'm picking it up a little late going, I think I missed that one, and then I'm coming back to it. So a weekly podcast. It's called Lead On. You can find it at the Gateway. gs.edu is the website. You can find it on that website. So I'd encourage our listeners to check that out too. Thank you, Dr. Iorg, for joining us. I look forward to our next conversation, and I hope our listeners will tune into that as well. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. For more information, please visit www.SaltyBeliever.com.